Welcome to Reading Bear. Today we've got a story where OP lets their parents crash at their place until mom and dad try to evict the actual homeowner. I bought the house because I wanted a place I could fix up without anyone putting their fingerprints on every decision. It wasn't fancy. It was a small place on a decent street with a detached garage and a tiny studio over it that the listing called an accessory dwelling. It needed work, but it was mine. I scraped together the down payment with savings from a job I'd stuck with for years, and the bank was happy enough with my paperwork to hand me a mortgage. I remember standing in the empty living room the first night after closing, listening to the fridge rattle and feeling like I'd won some quiet war nobody else knew was happening. The first few months were exactly how I pictured them. Weekend runs to the hardware store, too much caulk where there should have been less, paint on my forearms that made me look more confident than I felt. I learned the difference between a stud finder that works and a stud finder that just beeps to be polite. A couple of friends came by and helped me move a couch that was absolutely too big for the front door. I did the trick, where you rope it through a window. I felt like a kid who built a fort and managed to get away with keeping it up. Then my parents had a temporary situation. That's what my mother called it. A temporary situation. They'd had trouble with their landlord for ages. Late fees stacked up. The landlord decided not to renew. They told me they were looking for someplace cheaper, closer to my dad's work, but everything fell through at once. When my mother asked if they could stay with me just for a bit, it landed like a heavy box on my chest. I knew how this would go. I knew, and I still said yes, because they're my parents, and because I believed I could set rules and hold to them. I set the rules in writing, which was funny even to me. You can use the main bedroom and the hall bathroom, I said. But the studio over the garage is mine, while I work on the main house. I'll sleep there. We share the kitchen, but mark your stuff. No smoking. No guests without asking. You can't change anything without telling me. You're not paying rent, but you'll cover your own groceries and basic utilities. I wrote it all out and stuck it on the fridge, like a roommate agreement you print off a college website. My dad did that non-committal nod. My mother said the word, "of course," so many times, it dissolved into noise. They moved in with more boxes than I thought two people could own. My mother's hobby is bringing home items that might be useful someday. My father's hobby is not saying no to her. I spent the first week ferrying tubs of random kitchen gadgets from the front hall to corners that already had too many things. It wasn't all bad. I cooked a couple meals we ate together. My dad fixed a loose fence board without me asking. For a minute I thought, maybe we'd find a rhythm. We didn't. It felt like a slow slide downhill that you notice too late. It started with small things. My mother rearranged the kitchen because this way makes more sense. I'd walk in for a spatula and find spices where the spatulas were, spoons where the Tupperware used to be, Tupperware in a laundry basket on top of the fridge for reasons that didn't exist. Then came the house rules. She printed a list and taped it next to my rules on the fridge. Hers said things like, no shoes inside, quiet hours after dinner, and we are eating dinner together every night. The last line said, all decisions about the house go through parents because parents know best. It was signed, Love Mom, like a threat wearing a sweater. I took it down. She taped up another. I took that one down too. I moved more of my stuff into the studio over the garage. The studio wasn't perfect, but it had a small bathroom and a hot plate. I told myself it was temporary and practical, while the parents were in the main house. They started treating the main house like a retirement villa. My dad brought in a recliner that weighed as much as a small car and set it where my bookshelf used to be. My mother turned the dining room into a craft area that gave off glitter, like glitter was a gas that leaked. They kept telling me they were still looking for a place. I checked rental sites and printed listings and put them in a folder labeled options. The folder sat on the hall table and collected dust. Whenever I'd ask how the search was going, my mother would talk about the market like it was a living thing that had personally offended her. My dad would shrug. Sometimes he said the words, "We're fine here," like that was the official decision and I was supposed to be relieved. One afternoon I came home, and the locks were different. I stood on my porch with my keys in my hand, trying each one like I was the idiot who didn't know how doors worked. The deadbolt squeaked, but didn't turn. I walked around to the back. That lock was new too. I went up to the studio stairs and let myself in. My studio key still worked, so I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling until my chest stopped doing that tight drum thing it does when I'm cornered. I texted my mother. "Did you change the locks?" She wrote, "We needed better security." I wrote, "It's my house." She wrote, "And we need to feel safe." I marched down the stairs and knocked on the door because that felt more civilized than breaking my own window. My dad opened it. He said I'd need to check in before entering their part of the house. His exact words were, "This half is private now." I laughed out loud because that's what my body did instead of shouting. I asked for a copy of the new keys. He said they were for residents only. "I am the resident," I said. "I am literally the owner. I live here." My mother came to the doorway waving a paper I hadn't seen before. It was something she'd printed from an online template. At the top it said, "Notice to vacate." It had my name and an address and a date like they were performing landlord cosplay. She said I needed to respect the process and clear out the studio by the end of the month. I told her there wasn't a process where residents evict owners using clip art and questionable grammar. She told me to stop being dramatic. I took the paper, stepped back outside, and took a photo of it like it was a weird street sign. I went back up to my studio and locked the door behind me, even though locking doors was apparently optional for the people who lived downstairs. Here's the thing about my parents. They hate professionals, but they will invoke official words when it gives them a script to be in charge. If there's paperwork, they believe whoever holds it holds power. They wanted a process, a lease, a boundary, something they could point to and say, "See, by the rules, we win." So I gave them a process. I gave them all the rules. I gave them the lease they asked for, and I followed every letter of it with weapons-grade politeness. The next day, I set up a consult with a housing attorney. I took notes like I was back in school. I learned words I had never cared about before. Tenant at sufferance, notice to cure, unlawful detainer, writ of possession. I told the lawyer I didn't want a brawl. I wanted to do everything by the book so cleanly that if anyone put a microscope on it, they'd see textbook pages. He said the best path was to establish that my parents were occupants with permission that could be revoked, or tenants if I elected to treat them as such, and then move through the proper steps. He stressed the usual stuff: no self-help, no shutting off utilities, no locking people out. He told me to document everything. I became a walking scanner. Every note, every text, every time I found a new rule on the fridge, I took a picture with a timestamp. I walked through the main house once with my phone recording and narrated what I saw like a boring documentary. Their furniture, their craft stuff, my appliances, the places where they'd covered air vents with boxes. I didn't say anything nasty. I said things like, "This shelf was installed without permission, and the outlet here is now being used for a portable heater." I uploaded everything to a folder I named with the most neutral words, house, file. Then I sat down at my desk and wrote up a formal lease, but not for me, for them. If my parents wanted to treat my house like theirs, then we could do it on paper, the way they said real houses are run. I printed a standard lease for the main house for a month-to-month tenancy with market rate rent that I set on the low end because I didn't want to be accused of gouging. I added clauses any landlord could defend. No smoking, no alterations without written permission, quiet hours that matched city rules, no additional occupants, access for scheduled inspections, and a security deposit that would be placed in a separate account. I included a rider requiring renter's insurance. I included a section about maintenance and entry notifications. I put my name on the line that said landlord, and I put their names on the line that said tenants. I attached a cover letter that said as evenly as possible that their stay had transitioned from guests to tenants by their own standards and that the lease would formalize the arrangement so everyone had clarity. I asked them to sign within a week, or I'd consider their permission to occupy rescinded. It wasn't a threat. It was a sentence from the book the lawyer taught me to copy. I handed them the packet like I was handing forms across a counter at a bank. My mother looked at the first page and laughed. "We're not signing this." My father said something about family not needing leases. I said a lot of simple sentences in a row. You changed the locks. You posted a notice to vacate. You said this part of the house is private to you. You introduced rules and schedules for a place that belongs to me. The lease is what you asked for when you told me to respect the process. They didn't sign. So I moved to the next step. I sent a notice to sign or quit, which is exactly what it sounds like. Sign the lease or move out. I gave them the legally required number of days and sent it by certified mail to my own address like a person playing a game alone who still wants the scoreboard to be fair. I posted a copy on the door. I saved the receipts. During the notice period, the escalation turned petty. My mother made a chore chart where my name was under boxes labeled trash and bathroom. She kept crossing out my name and writing tenant next to it. My dad started calling my studio the above garage unit, like he was the superintendent of a building he'd found on accident. They didn't give me copies of the keys. They told my aunt I was trying to profit off family because the lease had rent in it. And my aunt called me and asked if it was true. I was evicting my parents to make room for strangers. I told her I was trying to get my house back, and if that counted as evicting, then I guess that's the word. She didn't love that answer. I scheduled the first inspection. A lot of cities require rental properties to be registered. Some have safety checks for smoke detectors, GFCI outlets, and basic things like egress windows. I registered the main house as a rental and booked an inspection. I gave my parents a written entry notice with the date and time. I did it by email and print because I didn't want to hear, "We never got it." My mother wrote back that the inspection was an invasion of privacy. My father wrote a note on the printed copy that said denied in pen like that word could stop a person from knocking. The inspector showed up and did what inspectors do. He checked smoke alarms and found 2 missing and 1 with a battery taped in wrong. He looked at the portable heater and told my dad it wasn't safe to run it in a closed room. He looked at the lock my parents had installed on the bedroom door and said it wasn't allowed because it didn't have the right emergency release. He was nice about it, but he wrote it all down. My mother followed him with a notebook, like she was collecting data for a grievance. When he left, she said the inspection failed because I didn't prepare the house, like I was a host who forgot to put out cheese. I handed her the correction list. I told her I'd fix the alarm and the outlet. The rest, like removing the extra lock and not running a space heater, was on them. My dad mumbled that he'd consider it. They didn't fix their parts. I fixed mine. I sent a second notice to sign the lease or move. They didn't sign, so I served a notice to terminate their tenancy. It said that since they refused to formalize their occupancy, their permission to stay was ending on a date certain. I sent it certified. I posted it. I put a copy under a magnet shaped like a rooster on the fridge, because the attorney said judges, like when you can show you used every route a normal person would use. My mother responded with another printed document. This one said family ownership certificate. It had a clip art house and said my parents were primary household leaders with final say on all property decisions. I stared at it and thought about how many trees had died for people to print nonsense. I left the certificate in the house file and moved forward. The thing about malicious compliance is that it only works if you let the other person set the rules and then follow them harder than they wanted. They said they wanted a lease and a process. They said I should respect official forms. They told me to stop being emotional and do it right. So I did, and I did it with such strict correctness that it made them furious. They expected me to slam doors or cry in the driveway so they could call me unreasonable. Instead, I sent them a moving checklist. On the day their permission ended, they didn't leave. I didn't touch a single box. I didn't raise my voice. I filed an unlawful detainer lawsuit. The attorney helped draft it so it was clean. I paid the filing fee. A process server knocked on the door and handed my mother the papers while my dad watched from the recliner like a man misjudging a magic trick. The server said in a very cheerful voice that they had so-and-so many days to respond. My mother told him she didn't accept, and he smiled and said, "Service accomplished." Then we waited, which was the hardest part. I kept living in the studio. I ate sandwiches to avoid the kitchen drama. I made a spreadsheet of every repair I'd done and every bill I paid. I kept the utilities on because shutting them off would have been illegal and also cruel, even if they deserved a wake-up call. They used the water like it was free and ran the dryer for single socks. When I asked them to stop blocking the driveway with their friend's truck, my mother said tenants have rights to the common areas and I should read up. I said the driveway was not a common area by the lease they refused to sign, and she said I sounded like a robot. I took notes and stuck them in the file. Their response to the lawsuit came in a packet that looked like it had been assembled by a photocopier with a fever. It said they were co-owners because family, and that I was trying to force them into homelessness. They attached a handwritten bill for all the ways they had improved the property, which included spiritual warmth. I wish I were kidding. My attorney told me not to laugh. He said to be ready with the deed, the mortgage statements, the tax records, and the photos showing the condition of the house before and after. He told me to bring the bank statements showing I paid every mortgage payment on time, and the receipts for the smoke alarms I bought. He told me to have the inspector's report in a neat stack and to keep answers short. Somewhere in the middle of all this, my aunt called again. She told me I was embarrassing the family. She told me no court would throw parents out. I told her courts don't care about family gossip. They care about who owns property and who followed the rules. She said I must feel proud of myself. I said pride wasn't the feeling, but I did feel tired. The closer we got to the hearing, the more my parents tried to bait me. They put another lock on the hall closet. They turned off the breaker to my studio twice, and when I reset it, they accused me of tampering. I bought a tiny battery-powered lantern and kept it on my desk so I could work without bothering them. I told my attorney about the breaker, and he said not to make it a bigger fight. Just document it, and we'd keep the thread focused on possession of the property. A few days before the hearing, I sent one more letter. It said I was willing to dismiss the case if they signed the lease, paid the deposit, and agreed to a move-out date we'd write down. It wasn't a trap. It was me being generous, even though I didn't feel generous. They didn't respond to the letter. Instead, my mother posted another notice on the fridge telling me to vacate the studio because it was unsafe and not zoned for living. She underlined unsafe 3 times. I put the notice in the file and slept like a person who knows a judge will not be impressed by underlines. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a clean shirt and the most boring shoes I own. My attorney told me to show up early and breathe. My parents arrived wearing matching serious faces. My mother carried a tote bag so full it pulled at the seams. My father had a stack of papers held together with a bulldog clip that kept slipping. We waited on a bench in a hallway with a dozen other people who all looked like they'd been through a small, specific hell. I watched couples avoid each other's eyes, and one guy flipped through binder tabs like he was looking for a map back to a better week. When our case was called, my legs felt like fence posts, but I stood up and went in because that's what you do when it's your turn. The judge was matter-of-fact. He read the file like a person reading all the ingredients on a label. He asked my attorney to summarize. My attorney said the dates and the steps and the notices. He showed the deed and the mortgage and the registration and the inspection report. He called me up to confirm I was the owner and that I'd allowed my parents to stay as guests who transitioned to tenants by their actions, and that I'd served notices and they'd refused to leave. He showed the photos of the locks they'd installed. He showed the family ownership certificate, which made the judge's eyebrows do a small tick. The judge asked my parents if they had a lease. They said family doesn't need paperwork. The judge asked if they had evidence they were owners. They said they were parents. The judge asked if they had paid rent. My mother said they shouldn't have to. The judge asked if they had made any payments toward the mortgage or taxes. My father tried to say something about sweat equity, and my attorney politely asked to see receipts. There weren't any. The judge told them the hearing was about possession of the property, not about family relationships. He told them the law didn't have a category called parent rights in a house they didn't own. He said the word unlawful detainer in a sentence and looked tired. Then the judge asked me one more question I didn't see coming. Had I made a good faith effort to resolve this without court intervention? I told him about the lease I offered and the move-out deal I proposed. I told him I kept the utilities on and didn't lock anyone out. I kept it short. My voice did the thing where it wobbles in the middle, but I got through it. He said he would take a short recess and come back with a decision. We stepped back into the hallway. My mother whispered to my father and then told me I was the reason families fall apart. I didn't answer. I looked at the floor and counted scuff marks on the tile. When we went back in, The judge read the order like he was reading a recipe. He granted possession to me. He ordered my parents to vacate by a date that wasn't far away. He said if they didn't, a writ would issue, and the sheriff would enforce it. He noted their arguments about family and co-ownership were not supported by evidence. He told them, in the plainest words, that they couldn't change locks on a home they didn't own and then evict the owner with homemade notices. He signed the paper. My parents stood there like someone unplugged them. I walked out with my attorney, and we stood under a small patch of sky that felt strange after the court hallway. He told me to keep being boring, to not gloat, to give the required notices for the lock change after possession, and to schedule the sheriff if needed. He said sometimes people leave at the last minute with a flurry of angry cleaning that counts as moving. Other times, he said, they wait for the knock because they think no one will make it real. The next few days were a waiting room that lasted forever. I kept my morning routine steady because it kept my brain steady. I made coffee on the hot plate. I ate toast. I worked. I tucked paperwork into labeled sleeves like a person in a movie about perfect filing systems. I printed the court order and posted a copy on the fridge and another on the front door. I texted my parents a photo of the posted order and told them I was available to help coordinate movers if they wanted, but I wouldn't be lifting boxes myself. They didn't move. They invited my aunt over for dinner. She parked across the driveway, so I had to honk when I wanted to leave. My mother sent a group text to relatives accusing me of weaponizing the courts. My cousin sent me a private message that said, "Dude, good luck," which felt like a life raft thrown by someone on a balcony. On the morning of the deadline, nothing had moved except a single bag of crafting ribbon. The family ownership certificate was still on the fridge, now curling at the edges like paper does when it knows it's wrong. So I went to the courthouse and requested the writ. The clerk stamped things with a satisfaction that only clerks can pull off. A few days later, a deputy called and gave me a date. I posted another notice. I sent another email. I took another deep breath. I told my job I'd be late that day. I warned my neighbors there might be some drama. One neighbor said he'd be planting tomatoes and would pretend not to notice. The morning the deputy came, the sky was bright and plain. I waited on the porch of my studio and watched a city car pull up. The deputy was calm like granite. He knocked on the main door and announced himself. My mother opened it halfway and tried to hand him one of her notices. He didn't take it. He explained the order. He asked if they had a place to go. My father said they needed more time. The deputy said that time was something the judge sets, not him, and the judge had set it already. The deputy gave them a short window to collect essentials. He told me to wait while they gathered those essentials. He told me I could change the locks after he cleared the house. He told my parents they could arrange a time with me to get the rest of their things later that week. He was gentle and firm at the same time, which is a skill I wish I had learned earlier. My mother cried in the living room in a way that tried to recruit the room onto her team. My father kept touching the remote like he had to say goodbye to it. They packed a few bags and some photo albums and the good towels. When the deputy said it was time, they stepped out onto the porch and looked at me like I had flipped a switch that soured the world. I didn't say anything. I didn't have anything that wouldn't make it worse or cheaper. The deputy stood with me as the locksmith I'd scheduled changed the locks. The locksmith moved like a person who had done this before and would do it again. He handed me new keys. I signed a receipt. The deputy asked for a copy to affix to the file. He posted a notice for the rest of the belongings that had to be picked up by a specific date by appointment. My mother took a photo of the notice and told the deputy she was going to complain to his boss. When the deputy left, the house was quiet in a way I remembered from that first night after closing the fridge. Hum, the click of the vents. I walked through room by room with my phone in my hand and narrated like before. I said, living room lamp is mine, and bedroom closet is full of boxes labeled MISC. I didn't make value judgments in the recording. I made a list. Upstairs, in the bedroom I hadn't slept in for too long, my mother had taped one last note to the mirror. You will regret this when you're older. I added it to the house file because documentation is everything, even when it's petty. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at the island and the way the afternoon light fell across the counter. I'd sanded myself. The counters had rings in 5 different sizes, from cups set down without coasters. I ran my hand across those rings like they were braille and felt a weird mix of relief and grief. Malicious compliance doesn't feel like revenge when you're in the middle of it. It feels like paperwork and patience and a lot of being the least interesting person in the room. It feels like choosing email over yelling. It feels like learning how to say, as previously stated, without a sneer. It feels like telling yourself every day that the boring path is the one that gets you home. The house was mine again on paper and in reality, but getting it back wasn't the end of the work. I still had to figure out what to do with the belongings they'd left, and the mess they'd made, and the echo they'd installed in my head that said I was a bad person for holding my own keys. I locked the front door, put the new key on my ring, and went back up the stairs to the studio one last time, because the studio had been a small shelter I built inside a bigger shelter that didn't feel like one for a while. I stood in the doorway and looked at the bed and the little table with the lantern and the hot plate where I'd scrambled eggs for dinner more times than I'd like to count. I felt grateful to that little space, the way you feel grateful to a friend who let you crash on their couch too long without making you feel like luggage. I unplugged the hot plate and carried it downstairs. I put it on the kitchen counter, like a flag. I wish I could say that my parents took the court order as a wake-up call and found a place and sent me a card that said, "We understand now. Good job being an adult." That's not what happened. What happened was more like a low, constant static of complaints from relatives who weren't here, and a few very practical tasks I handled by the book because that's how you do it when you've already decided to wear the book like armor. But that part, the part after the lock change, and before the final pickup came with its own new set of rules and one more round of fine, we'll do it your way energy that made the ending more satisfying than I expected. And that's where things got very literal. Very fast. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.